Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
And thank you for joining me in studying this week's Torah portion. In this week, we studied a portion of Mishpatim, a very powerful portion. It includes 53 commandments, one of the largest ones, 30 negative prohibitions, and 23 positive. So it's loaded with commandments. In addition, it was said immediately after the Ten Commandments of last week, and there is a discussion when those commandments were set, etc. Towards the end of the portion, we go back to the giving of the Torah. Our discussion today is going to be about a Jewish law for a practical matter that matters for us, derived from this week's Torah portion, and we'll see how in the spiritual sense, in the Kabbalistic sense, it makes more sense because it is the source of the Torah. Let's see. So I'm reading in the book of the Torah, in the portion of Mishpatim. By the way, the Rebbe's talk is in volume 16, number 5. In the Torah, towards the end, last few verses from the end of the Torah, we read about Moshe is going back to the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights to study the oral Torah. What happens to the people? They need a leader. So he said to them, Moshe said, among other things, Ve'lazkenim amar, to the elders he said, I'm reading verse 14, chapter 24. Ve'lazkenim amar, to the elders he said, elders meaning judges, Shvu lanu bazeh, sit over here, ad asher nashuv alechem, until we will return to you. Who is we? Moshe and Joshua. Vehinei, and behold, Aaron v'Chur imachem, Aaron and Chur is the son of Miriam. Mi bal dvarim yigash alem. Anyone who has a dispute or a matter to clarify should approach them. This is the verse.
71 judges.
71 elders and Aaron and Chur. So it's 70, not 71. Says the Rebbe, I'm going to read, it's easy for me to read from the text, even though it's Hebrew, but I'm going to read it fast and then translate. From the posuk, from the word, from the verse, Mibal dvarim yigash aleim, anyone who has matters should approach them. The Gemara learns the following rule. Ein nizkokin ela latoivei atchila. Whenever there is a dispute, you hear the side of the one who is demanding, the one who is the plaintiff. Not the defendant, but you listen to the plaintiff. Why? Because that it says anyone who has a matter should approach you. Who is the one who has a matter? Who is demanding? The plaintiff. So both of them have a dispute, two people. So we said to them, come down, let's hear one at a time. Who is going to speak first? The plaintiff. Is Mefarish der Shach is Siftei Cohen, who is a famous rabbi who comments on the code of law. What I just read to you is the Gemara, and it's brought up in code of law, that in the law of judgment of disputes. Shach explains reasons or what's the exceptions, etc. The Shach says that it means that you must listen to the plaintiff because sometimes it matters. In what case it will matter? In case the defendant came first and spoke up, then at times the ruling would be different. In what case? Says the Shach, Mode במקצת. Mode במקצת means someone who admit to partially admitting to the claim. For example, the simple example used all the time, I claim that you owe me $100, and you say, no, I owe you only 50. For example, I lend you 100, and you say, no, I borrowed only 50. Does it happen? All the time. We call it moide b'miktzat, a partial admission. Mode במקצת, because the plaintiff has no proof, there is no contract, there is no witnesses, therefore the defendant have to take an oath. The Gemara says the reason is no one is able to deny completely if he actually received a favor from a person. So it's easy for somebody to admit partial. In other words, it says, no, it's not exactly 100, it was $50. Therefore, he has to take an oath. It is a Torah oath. There are 4 oaths. 4 times a Torah makes a person swear. The rabbis will add many oaths, but they don't have the harshness or the responsibility that's taken like an oath from the Torah. So says the Torah, mודה במקצת, admission to part of the claim, it requires a person to take an oath for the remainder. In other words, he admits to 50, pay 50, take an oath that that's the maximum you owe him. What happens if the defendant comes first, says, I owe him $50? Before he had a chance, the plaintiff had a chance to ask, then he does not take an oath. He is exempt from an oath. Why? The time for the halacha is, the reason for that, says the Rebbe, and it's not the Rebbe, but the commentators explain that usually if someone admits to giving the money, we assume that he will pay it before the plaintiff will demand the money. And then when the plaintiff demands the money, he's going to deny it completely, correct? Because therefore, when the plaintiff comes to court and says he owes me 100, and the defendant says I owe him only 50, we say to the defendant, why didn't you pay him before? Why, if you owe him, how come it's in your pocket? The fact that it's in your pocket, we suspect that that's not the case, and therefore you have to take an oath. But what if he came first and says I owe him $50? We said I'm going to pay right away. And this way, the remainder of the claim is only 50, and he denies 50, therefore he does not take an oath. Did you understand that? Is that complex? Ali? It's not complex?
Not complex, but I'm surprised.
So I explain you the logic. Only when he is demanded first to pay and he admits to 50, we make him take an oath because we say to him, you should have paid the $50. It shouldn't stay in your pocket by now because you admit you owe. If you admit you owe him, why didn't you pay him until now?
What's the difference whether it's first or second?
However, if he comes first, the way I understand is we say to him, okay, so pay him. And he says, okay, I'll pay him. Here is the money. This way, when the guy demands now, he's not going to demand 100, he's going to demand 50. And for the 50, he ignores completely. The way I understand is that it breaks the claim now that it's not 100 anymore, it's only 50. Because it's only 50, he's denying it. For denying completely the claim, there is no oath. The oath apply only when you admit to part of the claim.
Okay.
Yes?
Question. If the guy is owing $50, he's probably been told by the president, he thinks it's vested.
What?
He first said, I owe $50. And the court asks, why did you pay it right away? He also asks another question. He knows he's going to be sued to go to Bezdin. Then this doesn't go on the air, someone just come and go to Bezdin. Give me $50, let's not go. Why didn't that happen?
It's not a good excuse.
Suppose,
Sure it is. He just said, he owes $50. The court said, he said, I owe $50.
So why didn't you pay him until now?
Right. Right, because he wasn't going to even invested.
what,
Because the guy says you owe him more than 50.
suppose.
Just a minute, I want to address Harry. I just want you to focus here. I thought this will take a minute. I was happy this one talk will take, I figured, a lot shorter, but let me explain. I think it's worth explaining. Mode במקצת, the partial admission, let's dissect it very simple. I come and say, you owe me 100, you say only 50 in front of the court. The court says, okay, pay him 50 and take an oath. Because the Torah, that's the Torah law, and the rabbis give us a reason. The rabbis explain that a man who borrowed from me would not have the gut to deny it completely. And therefore, it's easy for them to excuse themselves by admitting to part of it. A part, it doesn't matter how much. 10%, 70%, it doesn't matter. Just a Torah oath. That I owe him that much money and no more.
That's it. It's enough.
That's with God's name, you hold the Torah. It's not so simple. If he's found lying, he was not trustworthy on anything anymore. There's many ramifications, but that's what. The exception, that's all you need to know. Now, the exception to the rule is if he comes first. If he was able to speak to the judges while presiding about this matter, and he says, I want to speak first. And for some reason, he was able to get his way to speak and say, I admit that I owe him $50. In that case, we say to the plaintiff, what do you claim? He said 100. And he says only 50, he already owes you 50. He says he owes you 50. There is no oath at that point. Because that's why mi ba'al dvarim yigash alechem. In this week's Torah portion, we derive a new law. The law is that whenever you have a claim against a plaintiff and the defendant admits to part of it, you always listen to the plaintiff. Do you understand so far?
First, I have 50, that's 5 weeks notice. If he goes into the.
No, does not make a note. If he says, I owe him $50, the court says, okay, so go and pay it to him.
No, I'm saying, if he speaks first, he say, oh, $50.
If he would speak first, there is no oath, even though he ended up admitting only to part of what the plaintiff is asking. Huh? He pays only 50.
Because he came.
Because there is no proof. I want to move, this is just the introduction to the point. Comes the Gemara and says, Pe'amim, there are times that rule is not kept. There's an exception to the rule. Now you are guys are Talmudic scholars, so you know it's not always the case. What is the case if he can prove that zilei nichse? Zil means cheap. He said the reason he did not pay is because in order for him to pay, he has to sell a property. And because if he sells it today, he's going to lose money. That's why I didn't pay until now. Therefore, the court says, in that case, you pay what you owe and you don't have to take an oath. Let me use a practical example. The guy says, I have no cash flow. All my cash is tied in the stock market. Right now, this month, there was a member in the congregation that has stocks in the market, and he says to me, he knows certain months that he's worried it's always going down, and there are certain months it's always going up. He says, this month, this stock that I owe, I cannot sell because I'm going to lose. In that case, even though the plaintiff came first, the defendant is exempt from taking an oath. So far, so good. Let's focus because we didn't even start the discussion. I'm just giving you the introduction to the law. Let's summarize again. The Torah tells us in this week's portion, Mi ba'al dvarim, anyone who is a plaintiff has a claim against somebody, yigash alechem, come approach us, approach you, the judges. Says the Gemara, it's not Hasidic, it's not the Rebbe, the Gemara says, from here you learn that when there is a dispute, you always listen to the plaintiff first. Says the Shach, commentary to Code of Law, says, why is it important? Because if you allow the defendant to speak first in a matter of partial admission, he is going to be exempt from taking an oath.
For the rest of it.
And the only time that it matters, the plaintiff or defendant speaking first is in partial admission. In every other case, it doesn't matter. Comes the Gemara and says there is an exception to the rule, even if the plaintiff came first, which makes the defendant take an oath for admitting partially. There are a time when he will not have to take an oath. What case? If he can prove that by coming to court, Rashi adds somewhere, even by being taken to court, if he were to sell his stock or property, he will lose to pay. And if he can prove that, then we say to him, you have a good justification for not paying until now what you owed. Remember I told you that? And therefore, he's exempt from taking an oath. Is that clear? Just a minute. Is that, Harry, did you understand that? Go ahead. What's the question?
When he's alone, that's what he's doing.
That's not a dispute. He has to pay. There is no dispute, and he has to give a collateral. There is no doubt. However, it's being used to, he can use that as an excuse from taking an oath. Says the Rebbe, we know that the Torah is a treasured treasure by God, precious treasure by God, before he gave it to us. And therefore, the start of the Torah is in the spiritual realms, and then it changed, took many forms until it came into this universe to talk about physical disputes and animals and humans. Therefore, whenever things are not exactly fitting, it's very hard to understand. You can go back, trace it back to the DNA, so to say, of the Torah, the spiritual realms. And in that realms, it would be fitting perfectly. And this is what the Rebbe says. In our case, says the Rebbe, something don't matter. And that something don't make sense. What don't make sense? Says the Rebbe, the Gemara says that in all cases, from that verse in our Torah, in all cases, you let the plaintiff speak first. Comes the Shach and says the only time it matters is partial admission. It doesn't make sense if the Torah teaches that to us across the board in every dispute, and now you see that it does not apply across the board and it only applies to one particular category. So in other words, it's something is missing. Do you understand the question? Says the Rebbe, if you apply it in a spiritual matter, it will address this and explain every detail. And here is the way the Rebbe explains it. Now you understand? Says the Rebbe, the plaintiff in our life, all of our dealings in spiritual matter is partial admission, all inclusive. The plaintiff is the evil inclination. The Torah, it appears in the Gemara, he gets you into trouble, and then he's the plaintiff who is suing you in the heavenly court, demanding, why did you mess up? Why did you not do the right thing? Anybody heard that before? Harry, I'm sure you heard that, right? That's simple? Good. So again, the evil inclination is the plaintiff. Who is the defendant? Me, you, the neshama. What is he taking us to court for? For messing up. God has given us a mission. God has given us energy. God has given us talents, and we misused it. And therefore he demands that he wants to own our neshama. He wants to claim that soul and that full energy that was given to the human to his side, so he can get all the benefits from that human. Always the fight. The only claim we have is that we admit partially to his claim. In other words, there is no Jew that is replete of any good, that has given up and surrendered completely to the evil. So what do? We admit. We don't be, I don't know about you, but we admit, I admit to misbehaving, but don't think that you can take my entire existence. Says the Rebbe, it goes both ways. There is a tzaddik who is complete perfect. It says, Ein tzaddik ba'aretz asher yechta v'lo yaseh tov. There is no tzaddik that is not messed up something. In other words, he has a claim a little bit. by a rasha, by the most wicked, lowest human beings, afilu reshaim meleim mitzvot kerimon, even a wicked person without knowing, they are filled with good deeds. In other words, there is no black and white. Says the Rebbe, no human being is completely into the side of evilness. The evil inclination, the Satan, the angel of death, the impurity claim is the plaintiff. He takes us to court and is demanding that we move to his side. Our claim is only that it was a partial admission. We admit to some of it, but not to the complete. And therefore, we are going to, what do you do in a case? Now the Rebbe is going to go through the details. Says the Rebbe, let's look at the law of partial admission. In the law of partial admission, the Torah tells us, it's in this week's portion, Al kol dvar aveda, and everything that's get lost, al kol dvar pesha, I'm sorry, asher yomar ki hu zeh, meaning do not admit to everything. In this week's Torah portion, the Torah is talking about different types of negligence. One of them is a negligent, but the person who entrusted is saying, that's it that I have done, but no more than that. In other words, we admit, but not willing to give up and surrender to the evil. Says the Rebbe, let's go into the ruling of partial admission. What's the law about partial admission? If someone admits in court, they are required to take an oath, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The oath, how do you say oath in Hebrew? Shvuah. Shvuah is the same root of Svua, Sova. Ve'achalta, ve'savata, uveirachta. What is ve'savata means? To get satiated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So satiating, Shvuah in a spiritual sense of the Torah, the way it talks to spiritual, God says, let's give him extra energy. That's what I mean to partial admission. When you say, you stand up and you say, I have done wrong. I've allowed my time to be wasted. I disobeyed God, but I'm not completely evil. God says, take a note. Take a note in spiritual sense. You should be revitalized and re-energized with extra energy. With the extra energy, you should be able to overcome the evil. That's the idea of an oath spiritually. However, taking an oath, the rabbis in the Talmud warned us against that and tell us that we should stay away from as far as we can. And the reason is, in a spiritual, by the way, in physical life, it's also true. Before someone takes an oath, they warn them that you carry God's name. Don't carry God's name in vain. If there is a lie in the oath,
Bli neder all the time.
that's why I say bli neder. Right. Says the Rebbe, you don't want to give extra energy spiritually. You know why? Because if the person will mess up, continue to mess up,
Mm-hmm.
now the punishment or the harshness is double as harsh. Because not only he abused what was given to him originally, but even when we added more energy for help, he takes that help and dumped it into garbage. And for that, he's going to be punished twice. Therefore, we shy away from Shvuah, even though it will benefit the soul, have extra energy, will give him more power. However, at the end of the day, we know it's extremely challenging to stay away from the evil. And by doing so, if we do not stay away, the punishment would be much more severe. Therefore, we got to stay away from taking an oath. Therefore, says the Rebbe, what is the advice to be exempt from an oath? In other words, we want to get away with admitting partially and not taking an oath. Admit it first. What's the idea of admitting first? Yeah, but how do you admit first in the spiritual sense? Here is the Rebbe. I'll listen to your ideas later. The Rebbe says that there is a famous story of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the one who watched the temple to get destroyed and saved the Jewish people by allowing an autonomy in Yavne. he was escaped the walls of Jerusalem as a dead person, and he impressed the minister of war at the time, the Roman. And when the minister of war that was there, the general, was appointed emperor of Rome, he granted him 3 wishes. One of them is to say B'yavne and Chachamea, to have an autonomy that lasted for hundreds of years. Before he died, the Gemara says he cried, and he says, there are 2 paths in front of me, ahead of me, and I don't know, one is heaven, one is hell, and I don't know which path they're going to take me to. And I shouldn't cry. His students ask him, why are you crying? He says, there are 2 paths in front of me, heaven and hell, and I don't know which one they're going to take me to, so I shouldn't cry. Says the Rebbe, there is a famous question that most of the rabbis are asking. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is known as one of the best, the highest type of tzaddikim. He was in each generation, most likely the holiest man. He lived till 120, by the way. He was very similar to Rabbi Akiva, very similar to Moshe. He was a famous man that saved the Jewish people, that led the Jewish people during a very crucial, delicate time, because the temple was totally destroyed. The Jewish people fell into despair. He was able to regroup the Jewish people. And to come and say about that man that he's not sure if he's going to be taken to heaven or hell, what's going on here? In addition, says the Rebbe, why did he wonder about that at the end of his life? After all, we have a task. The question about going to heaven or hell, let's say it's not about sin. It's about fulfilling his mission. Did he do what he was supposed to or not? But that's something you should do it throughout your life, not at the end of life. So why didn't he cry about it when he was 80? What about on his 90th birthday? He should have said, cry and say, there are 2 paths, I don't know which way they're taking me. We don't see him ever doing it, and only when he was going to die, to leave the universe. Says the Rebbe, here is one of the explanations. When God gives you a mission, you and you and you and you and me, the mission is my target. There are other tasks that are positive and appropriate, but are not my mission. Therefore, doing those parts is breaking the contract that I have with God. The example I like to use all the time is, imagine you're an electrician and you're hired to wire the house with electricians, with wires. But then you come in and you see that the plumber is using bigger pipes, and it's much easier. And you say, let me do piping, like fitting like a plumber. Well, you might have did the right thing because the plumber didn't show up. He has other jobs. But you're negligent because nobody else is going to do what you're supposed to. So the house is not going to get a CO because there is no electric in the house. Imagine a gardener decides to fix the windows. So first the gardening is not going to look good. And then the windows, I'm not sure you do it as good as somebody else. When God created me, He gave me a purpose. That purpose should not be an imitation of you life or you life or you life. Not a Jew, not a Gentile, not a male, not an older, not my father, not my son. It is my purpose. My purpose served God is the ultimate. So I don't have to be a Rosh Yeshiva. There is a famous story of the Rebbe telling someone who was raised in a Lithuanian yeshiva, and because his head wasn't into the understanding Talmud, he was very depressed. And his Rosh Yeshiva, his leader, the deans of the yeshiva couldn't help him because it was the truth. He could not comprehend. I know full well, I know very closely people who cannot study Talmud. They don't get it. Until someone, he was literally depressed. So somebody sent a letter to the Rebbe. I think the letter is printed. I believe so. And the Rebbe says to him, realize that you have a job. And therefore, if you're going to become a Rosh Yeshiva, you're neglecting what you're sent for. So why are you looking out to the right and left and see, can I be the same thing or doing it better? That's not what you're supposed to do. You just find your talents, you calling, you reality, and do it. And therefore, says the Rebbe, in Rabbi Yochanan's case, I'm taking it quick. Says the Rebbe, that's why at the end of his life he's crying. He's not wondering, did he serve God or not? Of course he served God all his life. Question is, was it that mission that he did? Or it was someone else's mission? Now we can understand only at the end of the life. And this is the crucial part that the Rabbi is going to talk about in a moment. During his lifetime, he had no time to wonder about his purpose because he had a calling. And if he takes the time to contemplate what he's doing, how can, whether is he serving God in the proper way or not, is not called the calling, the purpose that God has created him for. And therefore he's going to waste minutes, days, and years or hours for something else that God will demand. Why did you take those hours and use them for something else? At this time, you can serve as a leader or teacher or someone who inspire people or study the Torah. That's what you're supposed to do. You have no time to think about yourself. And the Rebbe goes on to say that only because he was so engrossed in serving God for the purpose he was created, he had no time to contemplate whether it was his mission or not. And therefore, only at the end of his life, now he knows he's going to go up to heaven and give an accounting for his life. He starts crying. He says, perhaps I missed. Perhaps I did not do what my mission was. But during lifetime, to contemplate and cry over that is a waste of his energy. So far, so good. Harry, only directly.
So how do we know what our mission is?
How do we know our mission is a very good question.
The castle answer is to be upright, and be honest, and to follow the laws of Jewish and follow the commandments. That would be our mission. I'm going to assume. But maybe we have something else.
How do we know our mission is a very good question, but I want to continue and I'll address that soon, okay? Says the Rebbe, this idea of serving God because of my mission is a major distinction between serving God because that's how I feel like. Whenever someone puts his pleasure or his talents in a particular way because it makes me feel good or because I enjoy it, he's most likely missing the point, because serving God is for God's sake, not for what makes sense to me, but rather what God makes sense to God. That's why in this week's Torah portion, God says, "Va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem." It's in this week's Torah portion. Everything is in Mishpatim. Earlier it says, "Va'avadetem et Hashem Elokechem." Serve you God. "Va'asiroti machala mikirbecha." I'll remove all ailment. And immediately right after it says, "Lo tiye mesakelo va'akoro." There will not be a person who, here is the verse, I'm going to read it to you in translation. Lo siye, if you obey my will, which is just said, serve God, then there will not be a woman who miscarries or a barren woman in your land. At mispar yomecha amale, I'll fill up your days. I will cause the days of your lives to be full. Says the Rebbe, when you serve God because of respect and do what God wants, God makes sure there will be no barren and no miscarriage. What is barren and miscarriage in spirituality? Is someone who does not influence others, is barren. Or miscarriage meaning he does not have any offspring, spiritual offsprings. And therefore God says, if you serve God because of God's sake, not for your own, for yourself, then everything will bear fruits, everything will have an impact on others, everything will influence others to do good. Therefore, when someone does it because that's what he likes to do, that's what is easy for him, that's what fits his schedule, it will be barren. There will be miscarriages spiritually. What do you serve God? How do you serve God? "Va'avadete Hashem Elokecha." And immediately, "Lo tiyeh mesakela va'akara," there will be no barren or women or no miscarriage. When you do whatever God says, even if there is discomfort, how do you know that you're achieving well? Again, I repeat myself. When it will bear fruits, when you see other people who are influenced, when it leads you to serve God in a greater way. So how do I know my mission? My mission should have an impact on my surrounding. My mission should have my service of God should have an impact on myself to be better than last year. I look this year and I say, am I doing better than last year? Then I know it has not been barren and it's not no miscarriage. Do I impact others? Other people, some other people are praying, are keeping kosher, are celebrating a holiday. Then I know it bears fruits. That's my mission. Says the Rebbe, now we can understand how do we exempt ourselves from an oath. Very simple. What is the excuse for not taking an oath? To say that my property will be losing its value. Says the Rebbe, if you go to God and you say, if I will get busy with the evil inclination to go to court, there will be time wasted from serving you for the mission I was created, just like Rabbi Yochanan. And that's called cheapening or wasting time. My energy will be wasted to fight the evil. I don't want to. Then God says, even if the plaintiff came first, even if you admit partially, but you are taking upon yourself to immerse yourself in serving God for God's sake, not for your own sake, meaning you are not wasting time, you are not devoting time outside of your mission, then you turn to the evil and says, I have no time to go to court, because if I go to court, time will be wasted, even though for the right reason. It's to defend yourself, but that's not what God wants. And for God, God would say, you're exempt from an oath. You don't need extra energy. I'm not going to demand of you more, but you will be allowed to pay back for whatever you did. Did you understand that, Ali? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, Harry.
Do God's will, and God will do your will.
All right, thank you for sharing. And therefore, now we can understand when, as the Rebbe says, that the difference between a plaintiff come first or defendant come first is only in partial admission, because in spiritual realm, that's the only possibility of a court case. And we always, the weakest of the weak, or the righteous of the righteous, always the evil will have a claim and take him to court. But we can say, partially, we admit partially, even though we're taken first, and the plaintiff speaks first, we can turn to God and say we should not take an oath. We don't need the extra boost of energy because we don't have time. By taking the time to deal with the evil, we are wasting our time from serving you. And therefore, we don't want to go to court and we don't want to deal with that. And God says you're exempt from the oath. And this is a lesson from the one part of the halacha in this week's proposal.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Harry, did I accommodate you? Shabbat shalom, everybody.